Hi there. So this is the video introduction to the electro-optic effect experiment. And I'll just take you through the experiment um, and then give you some pointers on how to set it up. It's actually pretty straightforward. Um, there's only one issue that we want to be very careful with, and that's the high voltage supply for the high voltage that we're going to apply to the electro-optic crystal. All right, you'll see how that works in a moment. Hang on. Okay, let's take a look at the system then. So uh, to start with, we have a helium neon laser. The helium neon laser beam is going to be steered through two mirrors. Just as in the last experiment, having two mirrors allows us to completely control the position and direction of the beam. After that, the beam goes through a lens, then it proceeds through a polarizer and is focused onto the electro-optic crystal. The electro-optic crystal is mounted in a optical mount here, and then we have it under a plexiglass shield because of the high voltage that we're going to apply to it later in the lab. Afterwards, the laser beam goes through a second polarizer, and then it either goes to a optical detector here, or it will go to a screen that you place right in front of the detector so that you can see the beam with your eyes. Okay? And that's the basic setup. Oh, finally, we can use a digital voltmeter to measure the signal from the um, silicon photodiode detector. All right, here, let's take a look at the high voltage supply here. So the high voltage supply is sitting here. This is an old unit. It actually uses vacuum tubes, but there's nothing wrong with it. It works perfectly. In this unit, the output will be present at this terminal here. And we're going to connect to it a BNC cable. This is a special BNC cable called a high voltage cable, uh, which is designed for the conditions that we're going to use. This attaches just by pressing in and twisting to lock, just like any normal BNC cable. Let's see. You can set the polarity of the output, positive or negative, for this switch. The system should be at 0 volts with the output off when you change this switch, okay? Suppose we want to use this now. In order to use this, everything should be set up, and you should make sure that nobody is touching the other terminals at the other end of the wire, and then we can switch it on. First, we switch on the power to the unit, and we have to wait for about half a minute for the system to warm up. Remember vacuum tubes? They take a little while to warm up. Once the system is warmed up, we can switch the output to on. Okay? And now we can change the voltage. We change the voltage just by setting these switches. Right now it's at 0. Now it's at 100 volts. Now it's at 1000 volts, okay? Or 2000 volts. That's about I guess 2900 volts is the maximum. Okay? You can also set the volts in tens, and there's another knob for 0 to 15 volts. This one is a slider. It doesn't have steps. Most likely you'll be working with these three knobs. I don't think there's any reason to go above 2000 volts at the maximum, okay? But you'll get to see. All right, when you're done using it, or whenever you want to make a change, like a change to the polarity, you should make sure it's at 0 volts and switch the output off. Then, for example, you could change the polarity, or if you're all done, you can switch the power off. And that's how it works. Okay. I should say though that this unit looks a little scary, right? It is dangerous. It can put out a high voltage at a small current up to 10 milliamps. So we want to make sure that we don't get electrocuted when we do the experiment. Okay. Hold on one. Here, let's just take a look at the other end of the wire. Okay. This is the terminal, the other terminal for the high voltage BNC connector. And from here out are areas we have to be careful. Now, the outside of this connector should be at ground, so it should be safe to touch this. Likewise, the black wire here is at ground, but the red wire will be at high voltage, okay? And the red wire is just, and black wires are just connected to terminals on the lithium niobate crystal. It's a very simple setup. There shouldn't be any hazard. The plexiglass box is to keep us from putting our fingers in here, although you can see if you really tried, you could do that. So please don't, okay? Don't touch this, and don't disconnect anything or even really touch any of the wiring when the high voltage is enabled. And then you should have no problems at all. Finally, be careful about tugging on the wires too hard. You can see that this part of the arrangement here is relatively fragile. It's a very simple setup. And if you pull the wires too hard, they'll break. I've put in something here for strain relief, but nevertheless, try to avoid yanking the cable and pulling on the wires very hard so we can avoid breaking it. All right, well, that's about it. So with just simple care, I'm sure you will avoid getting a shock, but watch out. That's the one hazard in this experiment.